I know you would. Bonjour, how are we doing, you guys?
Good.
This is so exciting. It's a packed house. We had no idea how many folks we were gonna have this evening, so thank you for coming. My name is Marnie. I'm the Cultural Preservation Specialist with the 1854 Treaty Authority. I oversee our education and outreach programming. And this is the second year we've been involved with the Twin Ports Festival of History. And it was really awesome to hear that Carl has a new book being released in a couple weeks, talking about fur trade. It speaks deeply to our roots with 1854. So we thought we'd give a little more opportunity for marketing. Talk a little bit about the release.
That's the cover of the book.
This is the book. I'll pass it around. I need it back though. You'll see it says not for resale on it. That's the only thing that's gonna change when the book gets published.
So we're gonna kick it off here in a minute. Housekeeping things. Thank you guys all for being here. The restrooms are right where you entered through the front doors. If anybody wants to come up here, we do have a couple chairs left. And we can squeeze you in up front if you like sitting on the floor. That's usually my favorite. I think we finished the fry bread out there, so good job. Everybody knew Michelle was cooking fry bread. She makes the best fry bread ever in the whole world. We did not have a registration this evening, so we don't know who's out here. My coworker Matt is gonna pass around a clipboard, and if you guys could sign your name and your email, maybe we could get some dialogue going and maybe an evaluation after the event. What other stuff for housekeeping, Michelle?
I have to set for the swag on the back here.
Yes. Yes. Welcome to our house. So we do have some swag on the back consoles. You guys are welcome to have any of that. Again, free marketing. Any other housekeeping things? Oh yes, like I said, we didn't have a registration, and so we did not have a sign off to know that we were going to be recording this evening. However, we are going to be recording tonight's event, and you may be caught on film as we have new technology in our conference room here. That owl right there, it focuses in on whoever is speaking. So I do need to know in advance, or if you guys just want to pull me aside and tell me like, hey, I don't want anything with my face on it, I can definitely edit it out after the fact. Just please let me know. Again, my name is Marnie. So apologize to all of you that we couldn't have Carl here in the flesh. His brother Jim has just passed away, which is really, really unfortunate. And he had to be doing family things this evening. But luckily we had Rain who come here. I didn't know your title to begin with, so I kept calling you his agent. Oh, sure. She's actually faculty on staff with Fond du Lac Tribal College, but she's been involved with the development of this publication. And so I will say, take it away.
I think he's.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Do you want to say a few words about the Twin Ports Festival history?
This is our 9th event for the week, and there will be an event tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the Lake Superior Train Railroad Museum down at the depot, and they'll be talking about the restoration of one of their large engines that was donated from Burlington Northern, and they'll talk about that restoration process. But really, we've had a great turnout this last week. We really use this festival and all of our partner institutions, the Vaughn Memorial, the UMD, Glen Sheen, Children's Museum, the Depot, St. Louis County, Kuching County, as sort of a kickoff to heritage tourism in the spring. So we do it most every annual April. So look next year, and we'll have a program put together of 10 or 15 free events that anybody can take part of. I always think of it as homegrown for history weeks. So all the different venues, and you can come in here, and often we have libations and fry bread, so it's great. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Sorry. All right,
I'm gonna start by making sure everybody on Zoom can see this, so pardon me, a little technological thing we wanted everybody to be able to see. Let's see here. Now I'm gonna hope that they see what they're supposed to see on Zoom. Bonjour, Anin, Gawin Min Carl Cowboy in Dawasin. Min Rain Newcomb, Gawin in Dodo Davidson. Onigamin Sing in Donjaba. In Gekku Image in Fond du Lac Tribal Community College, Nimagwitu and Oma Ayayan. So I am not Carl Cowboy. My name is Rain Newcomb. I am not Ojibwa. I am from Duluth. And I teach at Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, and I am so grateful to be here tonight with all of you, even though Carl could not join us, and it was a great agonizing decision for him to decide that this was not something that he could be at. He had been really looking forward to talking to everybody about this project that he has been working on for the past 4 years. The copy of the book is going around, so I hope you all get to look at it by the time I am done talking. I wanted to talk a little bit about this project. I'm filling in for Carl because I guess I would call myself Carl's editor. That's what I would call myself. And we are launching a new press. You can see it on my shirt, on Miki Mazamikanan, Thunderbird Press, out of Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, to try to publish books just like this that tell the history and perspectives on this land that we all share, to be able to talk to each other about things that are important, and to be able to get as many voices and perspectives to have a real meaningful conversation going. So I'm going to launch into my presentation here. I'm going to try not to make anybody feel motion sick. I like to talk about images a lot, which is not great for our radio people who are here. I'm sorry. So here we go. Maybe. Let's see. Oh, that one advanced, but not this one. Okay, hang on. Technical detail. Oh, Marnie is gonna take care of it for me. Okay, so I guess I'll talk just a little bit while I'm waiting here about how I got involved with this project. I was going to spend my first sabbatical working with Carl Cowboy on a book of his paintings, telling the stories behind his paintings, talking about how he has been, for the past 60 years, painting visual sovereignty, painting the Ojibwa people in this region, doing real things, participating in real cultural activities, in real everyday life. And that has always been really, really important to Carl Cowboy. He also, this book came out of the fact that he taught, let me try forwarding it again. He also taught for 30 years, he taught college courses on the history of the fur trade and on the Métis people. I was curious if anybody in this room had ever taken a class with Carl Cowboy. All right, I knew I would have a couple. Miigwech, thank you so much for being here. One of my biggest goals in editing this book, when Carl entrusted me with a stack of files this big, right? His life work for the past 3 years, he just handed it to me. And he said, here, you take care of it, Rain. And I said, well, the thing that I want is I want everybody to be able to see and hear the Carl Cowboy that I know, who is brilliant, who is funny, who is well-read, and who tells great stories. So as I was working my way through this book, just like they're working their way through my technology here, and I might have shared the wrong screen, just possibly. As I was working my way through editing this book, that was first and foremost in my mind, okay? We are, since we're still on this page, we are going to be releasing the book on Tuesday, April 30th at Fond du Lac at the Tribal and Community College. We will be having a feast. The Oshki Yijik singers are going to be performing for Carl, and then we'll be having book signings and celebrating. There will also be things for children to do in the spirit of the fur trade and the Ojibwa community. Everyone is welcome at this event. And if you would come out to join us, I would really appreciate that. All right, so now that we're still working on technology, I'm gonna call out a couple of people in this room. I apologize. First, I want to thank Janice Fairbanks here, who was one of the readers of Fur Trade Nation. She provided me with key early feedback and helped out with proofreading. Yes, please give her a round of applause. To this back corner here with Rick Gresham in the corner here, he read through the whole book and corrected all of my terrible Ojibwa spelling. Thank you so much, Rick. You stand up, please. This is Keith. He is my research librarian at Fond du Lac. He's our librarian, and he helped me track down all of the sources which Carl cited years ago and then could not remember how to find again. So Keith and I have spent a lot of time digging through stuff in the archives. I also wanted to mention Linda Lagarde Grover, who was working with me on a different project during this, and is actually one of the people who is pictured in this book as one of our contemporary experts. So Carl has drawn a caricature of her. And I've also got Eleanor here standing next to Pete, and Blair back here, and Aaron and Jeff over here, who provided me with lots of moral support while I was doing this project. I thank all the people who let me talk about this endlessly when I was obsessed with nothing but the book. I have a 7.5-year-old who will no longer allow any talk about the book in the house. And she does not understand how it could take 4 years to make a comic book, because she makes one in about 45 minutes. She's like, I did 6 of these already. Why aren't you done with your 2 pages? Right? All right. Okay, let's get started for real now. This is Carl Galgoy, and this is the cover of his book. This is his painting Fur Trade Snow Removal. I want to draw your attention to the subtitle here, which says An Ojibwa's Graphic History. One of the things that Carl is very particular about is that he is not the sole expert on either the Ojibwa people nor on life during the fur trade. That this book is very much his perspective from reading, researching, teaching, and talking to people for more than 30 years about the fur trade. And when he first approached me with this project, he said, Rain, I'm gonna write a comic book about the fur trade. It's gonna be awesome. And I said, who are you writing this book to? And he said, well, I want Native people to read it, and I want Ojibwa people to read it so that we understand our history. I want everybody who lives in the state of Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, everywhere that was affected by the fur trade. I want them to read it. I want fur trade historians to read it and think, oh, hey, that's funny, or hey, that's something I hadn't thought about. And he said, basically, I just want everybody to read this book. And I was like, yeah, thank you, exactly. Right? And then I was like, so what other impossible tasks would you have me work on as your editor? Because it's really hard to write to 4 different audiences and have that work. Well, then he said, I want this book to not go in chronological order. I was like, oh, okay, you want me to write a history book, no chronological order. And he said, well, the problem with chronological order is that it assumes this Western interpretation of history, which is linear, right? And moves like this off into the future. He said, that's not how history works. It's cyclical, right? We need to honor the season, the fact that things come around again and again and again. And furthermore, wait, yeah, you can clap for that, because that's awesome. It's really hard to do. And he said, and I want to show contemporary people next to historical people over and over again. And I said, okay, what else do you have? He's like, oh, and by the way, this book is absolutely going to be about the history of winter in the fur trade. So, yeah, so this is during the pandemic. This was all full of cartoons. I started working with him on my sabbatical project. This is at the Fond du Lac Library when he first laid out the whole book as it was in 2021. And this is in progress. We had to pull up 2 more tables to fill out all of the, to put all of the drawings on. And then Carl and I started working in depth during my sabbatical. So I would drive out to his studio once a week and spend 2 hours, 5 hours, however long it took, talking to him about what was going on, about what was on his mind, what he was drawing. And this book turned into these, right? That's 12.5 pounds worth of drawings right there, okay? Now, back in my original box, I can fit the finalized book, right? Because they all shrunk down a little bit. So this is where we started. Oh, interestingly, because I love to talk about Carl and his art. Do you see on the file folders, these watercolor paints? I have a record here of what he was painting when, depending on which folder he was like scribbling on. I also have a lot of phone numbers that I have no idea who they go to. So if Carl Galway owes you a phone call, I probably have your phone number written on a file somewhere without your name attached. A quick overview of the book, because Carl has asked us to do a huge task here. He wants us to go from what is Turtle Island to what happened next, right? He wants to bring us through this great arc of history. So we've got, and these are some spreads from the book. So we've got everything from indigenous agriculture to clothing and fashion to artwork, and then all the way to the Allotment Act, right? And more. He's bringing all of these things together. What are you looking at? This one here? Come up and point at it. Show me. Beautiful things. Yes, that's our chapter about art. Thank you. Okay. Because I am doing this presentation and not Carl Galway, I'm going to start with some little known history about Carl Galway as an artist. This here, how many of you recognize Albert the Alligator from Pogo? Right? A couple of you. This is a drawing Carl did that won his very first art contest ever. It was an art contest from the Duluth News Tribune from 1957. And the, oh, this is Albert, as Walt Kelly drew it, right? And this was the first art contest that Carl placed in. And the he did not like the assignment given him, which is kind of a theme throughout Carl's life, right? Where he's like, I'm gonna rethink everything, because the newspaper said, copy your favorite drawing. Carl does not copy drawings, right? This version of Albert the Alligator is an original drawing. And I know because one of the things I study is comics. So I have in fact read the first 10 years of Pogo, which was when this was published. There is no pose of Albert the Alligator doing this anywhere in here, right? Carl looked at his visual references and he came up with his own way to draw this cartoon. And that's going to be a theme throughout this book because he is drawing on a lot of historical images and contemporary images, and he is redrawing them and changing them and making them his own. So he won second place. Here's his picture in the newspaper, right? And you'll note here it's very blurry because it's a newspaper picture, right? Blown up too big. And so here's first prize, third prize, second prize. Here he is. You can't tell it all, but like they've got these very nice school photos, and Carl could only find a picture of him holding out a very skinny Norner, not even one that justifies this pose. And he's surrounded by other people that got cut out. Okay. Carl has continued to cartoon, which many people don't know. We often associate him with watercolors and murals and paintings, right? So here's a book he published in 2003, which I cannot find a copy of. If you have a copy and you will let me borrow it, please let me know. It's called In with the Thin Crowd. It is finished cartoons. This one here is showing you that Carl has always drawn autobiographical cartoons about himself. He keeps them in a drawer to the right of one of his drawing boards, and he just shoves them in there. So they're all like beat up, right? But they're all in there. I am still looking for 4 Carl Galboy comics. When he was a child, his first comics were Nana Boozhoo as a superhero. He drew these when he was about 10. I think those are lost forever in history. In junior high, I remember reading his 3 Dog Night, How to Stay Warm in the Winter comic, and another one called 2 Seasons Winter and Road Repair, which was about the state of life in northern Minnesota. And the year I turned 16, my parents and I all together were 100 years old, and Carl drew our birthday invitation. So somewhere in the world, I no longer have access to it, is actually a caricature that Carl did of me at 16. We don't have to. I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to be a cartoonist and what, and it's something that Carl brings with him in anything he paints, right? You're trying to communicate with a single image everything your audience needs to know. Now, those of you who took the invite to move close can see this drawing. It is from the book. There's a shadowy figure in blue line here, leaning over this brick house. He changed his mind. He said, oh, that doesn't show what it needs to show. I have to show Albert P. Reagan, agent at Netlake, walking away with a briefcase. And this is why. This is his record, and this is in the book, we're now firmly in the book now, of one of the things that happened during the reservation era. And he is showing the agent stealing from graves and shipping things to Canada. Canada does not have the same reparation laws that we do for returning artifacts. Not that ours always work particularly well, but they don't have the same rules at all. So the last time Carl Galboy saw these, this is a set of handmade carpenter tools. The thing that this man built his life on. And here's a birch bark canoe being loaded into a railroad car. They're all still locked in the basement at the Manitoba History Museum. Right? Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of other images with how Carl is thinking about what we're showing here. Okay. How many of you recognize this from his painting, Joining the Women? Right? There's a full color version of this. Okay. With this painting, Carl had to think very carefully about what he could draw. Because one of the things Carl is always thinking about as a man with integrity, he's thinking, what is my story to tell and what is not my story to tell? So here, when he wanted to talk about Ojibwa traditions of coming into your own in the community, of becoming a woman, right? He said the only thing that I can show is this still quiet moment between everything else where one woman is braiding another woman's hair and they're talking. This I can show. I cannot talk about what else goes on during that. It's not my place, right? And then here, I had to convince him that since he wanted to go all the way to the Allotment Act, since he wanted to bring all those things in, I said, well, you have to talk about Sandy Lake and Chief Buffalo. And he said, oh, after Mary Biard did that great mural in downtown Duluth, everybody knows that story. I don't need to talk about it anymore. And I said, no, you still need to talk about it. And so I think probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, Carl painted a series. He called it the Chief Buffalo series, a series of paintings for the Madeline Island History Museum. You can still see them there. While he was painting that series, one of the images that he turned away from, right? So he was drawing this when he was about 70, I think. One of the images he turned away from is this moment when Chief Buffalo's party runs out of money and they have to put Chief Buffalo on display to tourists to raise the money to buy the train tickets to get to Washington, D.C. And Carl has thought about that moment over and over again and said, how would I feel if it was me being asked to put my culture on display to people who did not appreciate it or understand it, right? For pennies in a hat. How would I feel if that was the only way to save my people, right? And it wasn't until 6 months ago that Carl felt that he could draw this expression on Chief Buffalo's face, and that he could show this part of the story, right? So as we're looking at these images, I've lost track of where the book was. As you're looking at these images, as I hope you all get a copy of this book and read it, Eleanor has it back there. I hope that you'll pay careful attention to these images. And now I'm actually gonna start with the part that Carl was gonna start with. Okay, this is called historical discontinuity. And what he wanted to show up here, we have loggers taking the red pine, white pine, and thinking they thought they were the first ones here. Here's the homesteaders. They thought they were the first ones here. Here's mining companies. They thought they were the first ones here. Here's the resorts on ceded lands. They thought they were the first ones here. Here's two people in the boundary waters saying, now this is wilderness. They think they're the first ones here, right? And this speaks to a universal human tendency we have to assume that the world has always operated the way we feel it, we have it operating right now. Incidentally, this is Carl in the canoe looking crabby. Carl was gonna talk about how he came up with all of these pictures. He didn't tell me, so I can't share that with you. But when he was teaching fur trade history and talking to people about the history of the fur trade, one of his great concerns was that we forget that life used to be different here in this very space that we now all share. And one of the things that we forget about the fur trade is that we had an interdependent multicultural society that existed here. And I want you to think about that for a minute in the context we are currently at, where we've got people screaming about diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we've got people saying, this will never work, right? It's never worked in the past, or like, this is something we've just invented, the fact that we should all be able to come together in a community and shape our own reality, right? Well, Carl says, if we understand the fur trade, we can see that that was the history of where we all come from. And so in his book, he wanted to show, well, how did this happen? And how did it get undone? Yeah, how can we make this again? What do we learn from this? Okay. And one of the things that he is absolutely clear about is that the intercultural society, the fur trade nation, was entirely based on Ojibwa cultural values. And so he talks about that a lot. The whole second chapter in the book is just about those cultural values that were in place. This particular scene, he is drawing from oral history. This is the village crier who goes out every night with his drum and he tells people what they should do. He says, children, stop listening and get ready to sleep. All you young men calling on girls, go home. Remember to always obey your parents. Take their advice and respect them. If you live that way while you are among your own people, you will be respected when you go to a strange village. Young men, never abuse your wife. Women are sacred. If you make your wife's life miserable, you will die early. Our grandmother, the earth is a woman, and in mistreating her, your wife, you will be mistreating her. Never pass a poor person without giving them something to eat. The spirits who see you will bless you, okay? Now, this is all based on oral testimony recorded by Francis Densmore, and this one is a Winnebago in a different source. It's all in the endnotes. But he picked this Winnebago source because he said, oh, that's so much more poetic than my Ojibwa sources. So I'm going with that one, right? And the point here that he's trying to make is that social order, culture, how we behave is something that we teach and learn with each other. We are active participants in this process, okay? And then I wanted to point out, I made it big, I worked with this image for probably 3 months before I saw, what do you see right there? You see the village crier through the doorway, right? Good. It took me 3 months to see that, right? Slow down and look at these pictures. The other thing you can see in this picture, again, if you're sitting in the front row, You can see where Carl has showed the stitching that is in the wigwam cover, in the birch bark covering on this wigwam, and where he's got the reinforcement plaque, where it actually ties on to a tie. He shows us how to do all this too in the book. So I want to urge you not to rush through this book. It is a comic book, yes. It is easy to read, yes. Take your time, make yourself slow down a little bit. Okay, this is another whole spread. And I picked this one because it shows a lot of the things that the book does really well. And it does one thing that only happens twice in the book. Okay, so this is about ice fishing and netting and well, fishing in general. We've also got the netting here. Over here, we've got a drawing with, note the giant fish here, right? This is definitely a fish story. And we've got a quote from 1854 of a visitor describing how the Ojibwe fished. We have here our very nice biological creature feature where he has drawn in all of the different fish that were a part of the Ojibwe diet. Here he has, because I asked, shown how nets were made before any trade routes. So we've got the cedar floats on top, the rock sinkers on the bottom, and it's all made out of wood nettle. Now here's the professor who's going to come in with a little joke. He says, hey, if you want to make your own, make sure you use the native wood nettle and not the stinging nettle, which is an alien weed, right? Because that would hurt. Okay. Over here, he's going to show us how you make a hole in the ice with a chisel. This is a very short how-to. Here, he's got the 4 different kinds of chisels that the Ojibwe people use, starting with bone, flint, and then going to British steel. Here, he's got the guy fishing with his lure. I'm gonna try to stab the fish through the ice. He's on cedar branches, you can see them. He's got his dark house over him so the fish can't see him and he can see down into the hole, right? Now I said, Carl, I don't understand how this whole fishing thing works. Can you show me it from a different angle? So he drew me this. Please note what happened, what changed when he went from here to here. This guy is wearing a capote. He's got a fur trade era spear and a fur trade era fishing rod. This guy has a steel trident. This is a very modern tool. And the lure here is curved. He's got a quote at the bottom from Ben Chosa from a 2013 documentary where he's talking about making fishing lures. And one of the things that Ben Chosa talks about is when Ojibwe lure carvers went from making their lures perfectly flat to having this curve. So here we've got way back in the 1800s, we've got fur trade era, we've got modern times. And then here we have John Snow, who is so well recognized for his fishing lures, is that his lures are in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And whenever, right, exactly, that's awesome. Whenever he's got places where he can point out where Ojibwe people have been sort of mainstreamed, for a lack of a better word, where Ojibwe contributions have been recognized by wider societies, like we're pointing it out, right? Okay, so you can see there's tons going on in this one spread. The one thing that this spread is missing, that most of the other spreads in this book have, is a woman. There's no woman on this page. Because Carl really wanted to emphasize how important women were and are to the history of the fur trade, he and I made a conscious decision to make sure to put women everywhere we possibly can. Okay, and particularly to encounter things like this. This is an image by C.W. Jeffries, a Canadian guy. And this is his original image, right? And this image is published everywhere, especially if you are learning about the fur trade in Canada, right? And notice what this image does. The focus here, dude, gun, dead animal, right? Around the margins, literally. Kettles, the woman, the cloth, right? They have been marginalized. And a lot of times when I was coming across this image, people were saying, oh yeah, C.W. Jeffries, he made that in 1785. Well, he did not. He made that in 1945. He had no idea what he was looking at, right? And one of the things Carl says a lot is the number one thing that moved back back and forth through the waterways of our land was cloth. This is not the fur trade, it's the cloth trade, okay? And these cooking pots, the metal kettles, revolutionized the ability to store and process food, which was absolutely key for the entire fur trade, because these dudes are not making their own food, right? No, they're trading as much as they can for actual food. And Carl says, now when we look at this, how is it that people would think that these are how Native couples shop together, right? Because he's like, I know how Native people look when they shop together. There he is at the Miller Hill Mall, right? The dudes sitting outside waiting, they got nothing to do. The women inside taking care of business. He says, this is what the fur trade should have looked like. So he's redrawn it, yeah, thank you, exactly, yes, thank you. So he's redrawn how it would look with tons of people dressed in different clothing, speaking different languages, talking to each other. Please notice how many women are on this page. There are as many women as there are men in this scene. Yes, that is a thing that deserves to be clapped for. Thank you. There's a little treat for all the fur trade historians. Where's my fur trade historian? Right here. You can't see from back there. That couple right there, these guys, this is a half caste and his two wives. A lithograph by a guy named Grinsbacher who made it in, oh, and I can't see my notes, 17 something. He was an actual witness to the fur trade, right? So Carl has gone back and said, oh, here's a guy who was actually painting what he saw, not like that Jeffers guy. So he'll hide little pieces like this in there. I documented them in the endnotes. For those of us who don't have it, yes, it was tons of work to put it in the endnotes. Okay. One of the other things we have throughout this book are the power couples to emphasize the importance of intercultural marriages. Yes, intercultural marriages absolutely matter. These are the Cadots, this is Madeline Cadot, who Madeline Island is named after. She was that important. The Cadots were French fur traders who came over. They started marrying Ojibwe women. They brought up they created a whole fur trade empire. One of the ways that fur traders were adopted into Ojibwe society was often through marriage. And there are a lot of misconceptions about what these marriages were like, in part because most of the records that we have that are written from priests who did not marry these couples and did not think those marriages counted. More contemporary scholarship, especially in the last 20 years, including Sylvia Van Kirk and Brenda Child, have all showed us that these fur trade marriages were long-lasting dynasties, right? And the Cadots are still around. Here is Jonathan Keenan Cadot, who is not a baby anymore, born in 1995, right? And there are so many fur trade couples in here. I especially love the family dynasty of the Bonga family in here that talks about an Ojibwe understanding of race. I also really love the fur trade couples. There's this one, his name is McLaughlin, and I can't remember what his wife's name was. We only have her Christian name, but McLaughlin apparently was very well known for beating up missionaries who he thought disrespected his wife. Apparently not an uncommon thing. There are lots of really great power couples, and they're spread throughout the book so that you are always remembering as you're looking at this book. Okay, let's remember these things. Yes. And let's remember the importance of women. Here I have just a little bit. Okay, here, if you can see, here is Alexander Henry, who's coming back, who's trying to trade beaver furs, right? And he says, I was the best at having been obligated to fight with the women. over and over in the historical record, there are fur traders who were like, everything was going great until the women showed up. And then I had to pay 3 times the amount of what I was gonna pay for this thing, right? And you can see that on her expression. She's like, no way, dude. She's like, don't try to fool me. And the grandma's like, heh, 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 you have no idea what's about to happen to you, right? We have another piece here. Women have command of their own bodies. They being at liberty to do what they please. That's from 1703. This source, when Keith and I tracked it down, we found that on the previous page, he specifically talks about queer women in Ojibwa society. And here we have Priscilla Buffalohead, one of our seminal scholars in 1983, talking about how mothers have some right to decide how many children she would bear, right? We get this idea of freedom. And the idea of freedom is one that he's going to come back to over and over again. And that if we want this kind of intercultural, interdependent society, women also have to have absolutely equal rights. And, you know, maybe I would add if women got to own all the property again, things would be okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to point out in the book, and you can see this is Carl's actual handwriting. This is the font I made out of his handwriting so that everybody could read it. Because when the more emotional Carl would get, the less legible his handwriting got. So I kept on trying to point out that Ojibwa women owned property. Their men left them, or more often, if they kicked their men out, right? They just went on with their life. Everything was great, right? What was happening at the same time over in Europe? If you were a woman who was abandoned or left by her husband, you were going to end up probably in debtor's prison or in prostitution, and your children would become orphans, and then they would be forced to work in the mine, getting the cheap iron ore for the trade goods, right? I was like, can we please point that out? He says, we don't have to point everything out, right? And over, this was something that Carl said to me. We don't have to point everything out. We can trust our readers to look at these pictures, to look at these words and figure things out by themselves. So I did not get to point out that J.J. Astor, the America's first self-made billionaire, is only a self-made billionaire because Madeleine LaFrambeau agreed to sell her fur trade empire to him, right? So the America's first multi-billionaire was made by an Ojibwa woman. He's like, no, people will come to us, right? And this is one of those particular, remember I said Carl asked me to do a number of impossible things with this book. This is one of those places where we have a real difference between the Western rhetorical traditions, which we have all just absorbed without even realizing it, and indigenous rhetorical traditions, which are based on entirely different relationships with the audience, right? Most of our Western rhetorical traditions are based on Aristotle, who was like, you take your audience and you lead them by the nose because they're stupider than you, right? You just take them and you show them how to reach the one truth, right? These indigenous rhetorics are like, there are many perspectives here. I'm going to tell you my piece and you are going to add to it. You have to bring your own thinking. I want you to just think for a minute, what would happen to our national dialogue if we all trusted each other to think a little more and stop being taught to we have to be told. Incidentally, Carl also says that this is the first fur trade book that he has ever seen that shows the cost of trade goods on poor people and the environment in England in particular. It's pretty heartbreaking. Which is why he's got jokes in there. There are a number of fur trade jokes set aside in these little margins. This one is saying the English have no sense. They give us 20 knives for one beaver skin. And all of the fur trade jokes are actual real historical events. There is one that is a story told only to Carl. The rest of them are things that show up over and over in fur trade histories where he has illustrated them and been like, hey, remember, there's funny things in here. Carl has a great sense of humor. It's something I wanted to bring out. I didn't have to work too hard. Here we have William Wood, Puritan, complaining about catching beavers. They are too cunning for the English, who seldom or never catch any of them. And then right next door, he has put an example of the traditional method for trapping the beaver, a deadfall trap. Put a notched stick of aspen under a large log, wait for the beaver to come in and chew on it, and bam, flatten beaver, right? One of the things that he kept coming back to is this idea of freedom. Here he's got every man's a chief, right? This guy's leaving the battlefield saying, later dudes, the pumpkin harvest awaits at home, right? This was very, very frustrating and very confusing to especially the Europeans who were conditioned to obey Pope, King, Manor Lord, man, right? Instead, he says Indians were free to disobey orders or leave altogether. And we have this quote, the village chief was supposed to be boss, but he was merely a figurehead because every Chippewa was and is free. And you can see, he's like, do this. And the little kid is like, whoa, that guy's yelling at us. And she's like, whatever. And this woman's just like walking off laughing, right? This quote is from Robert Galboy, his father. In 1945, when Robert Galboy was recovering from frostbite on his feet that he got from working from being a lumberjack, he decided he was going to write down his memories and all of the stories that had been passed on to him. Carl got this. Carl could not read his father's handwriting. This wonderful angel by the name of Mitzi Lottie, who was in the Indian Studies department at UMD at the time, said, I will type those up for you. So now we have these, and they became one of the sources that Carl used in his book. And so here is his dad talking about chiefs and how many different kinds of chiefs there were, and that every single Ojibwe person is descended from a chief of some kind, because there were blueberry picking chiefs and canoe making chiefs, right? If you were good at something, you were in charge. The community recognized your authority to teach others. And this right here, staring at his back, this is how I'm used to seeing Robert Galboy depicted in Carl's paintings. This is the first time he has ever shown me a picture of his father's face. And this is his father talking about the law against firearms and how his dad was like, whatever, I've got 1,300 rifles, don't bother me, right? But this is the first time I have ever seen his face. And when I asked Carl about that, because his father shows up in many of his paintings, Carl said, well, of course I always draw my dad's back. I followed him around all the time, right? That's what I saw. And so I'm gonna flip out of the book real fast. Okay, these are two paintings Carl has done 30 years apart. They're both called The Offering. They both show the same scene. This is watercolor, this is acrylic. That's Robert Galboy in the front of the canoe, in both of them. And I am absolutely positive, because I recognize the suspenders and the posture, that's Carl in the back. His dad always made him paddle in the back of the canoe. I know often we think that that's the position in charge, but no, you put the strongest person in the front, right? And so every time I see a picture of a man from the back like this in one of Carl's paintings, I ask myself, is that his dad? What's he saying here about this history? Okay, thanks for bearing with me on that little digression. I love talking about Carl Galboy's life. I want to go back to that idea of audience and how many different audiences we have, how many different audiences we can appeal to, okay? He's got freedom as the principal understanding that the Ojibwe understand themselves as a free people, the primacy of clan to that being in a clan gives you a purpose, a role in the community. He's also got like awesome kind of living off the land survival skills. Here's how you build a birch bark canoe in 4 easy steps. Carl has hilarious stories about that. Here's how you carve your own handle for your crooked knife or your axe, because of course, these items were traded without handles. Everybody carved their own, so it was the right size for your body. And then here is how to skin an animal. I now know how to skin like every kind of animal in the world, stuff I never thought I would know. But here's how to skin all kinds of different animals, right? And so we're thinking about, who does this apply? Who does this appeal to, this survivalism business, right? And so this is one of those things where here, this is going to appeal to a number of audiences in Minnesota, but we're gonna be cautious. Thank you. That the Ojibwa always submitted to community authority. This is a story from Maud Keg, another oral history, where these two dudes went out to harvest manure before they were supposed to, and they ruined the harvest for everybody. So this woman is destroying her canoe and their canoe, and everybody's watching, right? That yes, we have freedom, but it cannot infringe on what the community
They
needs.
use the canoe,
everything.
they use the canoe and then she destroyed the canoe.
Yep, said, oh, you disobeyed, no more canoeing for you, right? And it takes a long time to make a canoe, okay? The other thing I asked Carl to do was to retell me the story he had mentioned once about two spirit people during this time. This is Alexander Henry. There are a couple of accounts in which Yellowhead, this woman here, child of a Salto chief, is talked about. And all of our European historians or recorders are all really confused by Yellowhead. They say things like, he cannot be persuaded to act like a man. What is going on? Well, Yellowhead was a woman to herself, right? And so Carl and I looked at this story and we said, so how do we tell the story of Yellowhead in a way that centers her in the story and not everyone else's reactions to her? We do have some oral histories that cover Yellowhead, but not very many. Mostly we have these dudes who were like, what is going on here, right? So we figured out Yellowhead, crazy good shot with a bow and arrow. She once held off an entire band of Dakota warriors covering her friend's retreat. Here she is in the middle of a famine, presenting John Tanner, famous sad sack captain, with an entire pile of food and trade goods and a marriage proposal. Tanner's mother, Netnokwa, loved the idea. Tanner said no, even though he's like, oh, I'm a sad sack captain, right? And then she had a happy life at the end, right? Yes, hardly anybody gets a happy life at the end here. She marries into this very influential family with a powerful, handsome warrior and two other wives. So we've got an economic powerhouse of a family here, right? And Carl said, okay, but I grew up in the 1950s and I don't really know how to talk about this. I'm totally colonized. What do I do? And I said, well, let's find an expert. This is Dr. Kat Warchowski. She is a Red Cliff and Lac de Flambeau descendant, and she allowed us to interview her about two-spirit history during the fur trade and beyond, because she has been doing a lot of research in uncovering that history. What happened? How were two-spirit people protected? How were they hidden? How have they been forgotten? Okay, again, we don't have to say anything. When you look through this book, find those little treats that are gonna say, hey, I get this, right? Who's this right here? Skyrim, following to Turtle Island. He's not gonna explain this. Why do we have a picture of a golden-breasted woodpecker next to Madeline Island? Because that's the name of Madeline Island in Ojibwa, right? So there are things in here that are meant not to preach or talk down to, because remember, we've got a lot of different audiences who we need to balance their needs. One of the ways that Carl decided to do this was to say, we're gonna trust our audience. We're gonna trust our audience to know or do the work. It's one of the reasons there is no glossary in this book, even though we use some weird words. And it's one of the reasons that, we don't translate Ojibwa that has been put into the modern spelling system by Rick back there, because you can look it up in the Ojibwa People Station. Okay, I'm almost done. I want to give you 3 people's readings of this, because Carl said, I want people to look at this book and see their own history. I was sitting in my office with a Fond du Lac elder. He was looking at this picture of a dam being built before the Ojibwa came here at the base of Esquagama Lake, right? And that this is the canoe route from Lake Vermilion to the St. Louis River and Lake Superior, a major source of transportation. He says, this is a place where it was dammed to make things easier. How many more places, how many more of these water routes were created by people, right? And we get that sense of, I don't know if you guys have heard this one, the idea of the native who lives in perfect harmony with the land and never makes any mark on it or changes it in any way. He's like, no, that's not true. This is Rick's handwriting back here. I don't know if you recognize that, Rick. He was reading this book, and he looked at the 2 cross sticks over a door frame that says nobody's home. This is the Ojibwa law, right? You just put 2 sticks over it, nobody's home. And Rick said, hey, I remember seeing this in people's modern houses. Nobody's home, lean a stick against the door and they can drive by and see. I showed this picture. This is King Charles, Queen Camilla at their coronation. I showed this to a British friend of mine, right? You'd think Brits would know all about the king and queen. He looked at that and he went, oh, I had no idea those were weasel tails dangling off of their ermine, right? So there's something for everybody in this book, and I'm gonna try to wrap it up here. Oh yeah, look, I am wrapping it up. Go me. Again, Carl here, being an artist is no excuse for sloppy research. These are endnotes. Here is his very extensive bibliography, because he says, you can go and check my resources. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the things I made Carl put in. So if you would like a copy of this book to read yourself, you can pre-order it online at the Fond du Lac bookstore, bookstore.fdltcc.edu. If you choose that you want to have it, that you want to pick it up, we will have it the night that Carl comes to sign books at Fond du Lac. You can also get, while you're there, the one piece of merchandise that Carl requested. He said he wanted to see his daughters and granddaughters, and I pointed out he should include his grandsons and sons as well, and he said, all right, Rain, all right. This t-shirt that has, we call them the axe and knife lady. It's a woman brandishing a Hudson Bay axe, another one with her knife. And so we call those the axe and knife, or the fur trade women. And there's also an otter mug, because Carl draws great animals, with the Thunderbird Press logo on the back. So, there you have it. Thank you all for listening.
So the picture of the reader here, is there a book of just his artwork?
Is there a book of just his artwork? There is not yet.